Dana 44, and when we're bolting up our caliper here for the brakes, we find where I got it marked there. If we tighten this up, it was rubbing. So you can see where it's close and rubbing there, but if you look down below, you can see we've got some clearance, we've got a gap there. So what happened was, if we look down in here, it'll be hard for you to see, but basically the spindle was shimmed in there. Previous repair years ago, mechanic he shimmed that spindle, and the shimming there, when I put those shims back in there, it started rubbing on here. Now I could grind that down and make a clearance so it's not rubbing anymore, but you know, I'm trying to want to make the proper fix here. So I've got a new stub shaft, so I'm going to disassemble this, and we're going to assemble it with the new stub shaft. And I'm thinking the problem is maybe it might have been damaged here, and that's what's causing our trouble. I cannot see how this stub shaft itself would be bent to cause us any problems. I think that the damage must be in here. Who knows, maybe from assembly, more likely assembly rather than some kind of accident, because for that to be damaged, I think that we would have other problems too. Here we are after installing that stub axle, and we get in here and hopefully you can see that we have our clearance back. So that's good. But the problem now is when we are engaging our hub from free to lock, it's not engaging, the hub is not engaging. So I've got that on lock, and I'll turn it and you can see that the pinion is not turning on the front here. What's going on here is the spring is contracting, but it's not engaging the gears from the hub to the stub axle. So even though it shows that it's locked, it's not locked. And you would never know that either unless you had the truck up on stands and tested it to make sure that it's working. So we're going to take this apart, and we're going to show you what the problem is. Okay, with that hubcap off, if we want to engage this, that's engaged, which is moving. There's a spring in there in this plastic piece, which is moving that upwards to engage the gears. When you engage the gears, that's going to push in on this piece here all the way around, and that's what's going to lock the hub and the stub shaft. The problem is it's not pushing in all the way and it's not engaging. So we're going to remove this locking hub section out. There's this little snap ring that goes in a groove all the way around the hub, and then we will get some snap ring pliers. We're going to remove this snap ring here, and then we'll pull that off. We've got the hub removed, and these are our two snap rings. This one goes on the stub axle, this one goes inside the hub. Just screw in some of the bolts off the cap there and use those, and then pull it, should slide right out. Here we are with the hub removed, and if you can see, there is a space, there's a clearance in there between the stub axle and the spindle. And then on this side, if we get a light in there, it looks like it's almost touching.
so it's not concentric. And that, I think, is what's not allowing those gears to mesh and engage. And that's why we don't have a locking hub on the driver's side.
So I'm going to give you some theory on this job. I bought this truck back in 2000, and around there, and I'd taken it to a guy a few years after that to do some work to it, and he had told me that he felt that the axle tube was bent, and so therefore he shimmed the spindle that attaches to the steering knuckle. And you know, life goes on. And so now that I'm doing all this work again, I had known about that years ago. That's what he suspected the problem was. And you know, I don't see any damage on the tube. I find it hard to believe that the tube is bent. But then the next thought was possibly needing a new stub shaft from the U-joint from here to here. I believe that that could be the issue, because if there's a problem where the U-joint gets installed, if it was damaged from a previous assembly or you know, a factory flaw there or something like that. So I bought a stub shaft to put that in there. That fixed some of our problem. And but now we still don't have a locking hub, and you would never know that unless you have the vehicle on stands like this and probably disengaged from the front drive shaft so that you can actually see whether or not the pinion's turning. And now, after all of this, I think the reason is because of this steering arm here that gets bolted to the steering knuckle. And these three studs that go in there, the clearance is so tight, and this is so difficult to get off because it'll be all rusted together, and you got to heat it and beat it and penetrating oil and whatever you got to do to get this thing off. And you need to get it off to change the upper ball joint. So I think what's going on is that in the process of people removing that to change the upper ball joint, they're distorting the steering knuckle. And the reason I say that is because the problem is only on the driver's side and not on the passenger side, because the passenger side doesn't have this. So I'm thinking that's what's going on here, is that this steering knuckle is getting damaged from trying to remove that. The last time I did this, I come to the conclusion that remove all these studs and nuts and just put bolts in there, and then you can unbolt this and take it off, and you're not going to have to beat the hell out of it to get it off of there. So I got another one, but who's to say that one's not damaged either, because you could see that it's all beat up from somebody before me, and obviously I kissed it with the hammer too to give it some hickeys. So we can change it and put it on there and see if it's gonna help our issue. But if it doesn't, we might not have a functioning locking hub on the driver's side. Here's my new used steering knuckle that I've disassembled and got ready to install in there. Hopefully that might fix our problem. But so here's the spindle, and the spindle gets bolted on there. And what happened was, the reason I'm suspecting this is the problem is because the mechanic had shimmed the spindle to get that clearance from the stub shaft and the inside of the spindle and the stub shaft there, right? So if he's shimming it in here, either this is an issue or this is an issue, because those are the two that you're making a difference on. I speculate that this is getting distorted because however you're hanging on to this piece and you're trying to beat that arm off of there with whatever you choose to do to get that off of there, and it don't come easy. There, you know, you could be slightly distorting this flat here, and the other connection is for your upper and lower ball joint when it's connected. So that's the idea. I think that these are getting damaged. If it ended up being the same problem again, I guess your next solution is to remove all these studs and remachine the face on here. You'd have to install it, you'd have to mark it, and you'd have to machine the face on here to try and true that up again. We put the new spindle on here just to show how tight it is on this side compared to this side here. This is the same problem as we had with the other spindle. So that goes back to my theory that this surface has been warped, or it has been altered while this arm was removed at some point. Because it's so difficult to remove, I think that maybe that surface got compromised, and that's what's creating our problem there. So we were going to try and change that piece out. We noticed with the spindle on, whether you want to put the new one on or the old one on, it's going to be tight up against or touching on the steering knuckle on this side. And on this side we have a gap, and that gap is almost half the way around, maybe a little more than half the way around. I made a couple of marks here and here, so if that did need to be machined to face that off, I would draw a line across there, and I would try and remove some material on that side. And I would go by measuring this gap here. Now, what I also did do is I removed the spindle and I rotated it and put it back on just to make sure that we don't have a warped flange on there. And also we use the other spindle as well. So I think that this gap on here is basically highlighting our problem. And I'm hoping when we put on the new one that that'll eliminate our issue for our axle being concentric in the hole for the spindle, and then so our locking hub will engage. Here we have our new steering knuckle, new spindle assembly, and we've got the bearing in the bottom of the spindle there. And if we put our stub axle in, get up to the top here, we can see that it's looking pretty good. But what I'm doing is I want to also show that I can push on the bottom of this, and there is some room with that bearing that it will distort inside there, because it's only being held by a small bearing right here and nothing else. So there is a little, like, you can move that, and that's where that axle is contacting, or can be manipulated inside the bore of the spindle. Just something to take note of, and we'll see when we install this one here if we've improved anything. Here we are with the new steering knuckle and new pinion, and we're in a little better shape. It's a little more concentric, but I will admit it looks like there's more room on the bottom. So, but it does look like it's in better shape. Also too, when we mated the spindle up to the steering knuckle, there was a little bit of space in here, but not as bad as the last one. So we'll throw the rest of it together and we'll see if that fixes our problem. Here we are, all said and done, and we got our locking hub all cleaned up, and we got it, it'll slide in and out of there real nice, but we still cannot engage the inside mechanism. It needs to go in, it needs to push freely in, and the spring that's in behind there needs to release it and hold it out here. So it needs to slide in and come out for the engagement, and that's not happening. So I think even though we kind of improved things a little bit, we still don't have a working locking hub here. So I think the next step is to machine the steering knuckle if I want this to work correctly. We can also try to increase the clearances in here in this center section. Can do that maybe to just get a little more clearance and see if that ring will engage. But as it is right now, that's not going to engage. So that's my solution to the problem here, is going to be milling the steering knuckle, and I'm not prepared to do that quite yet, so that might be a future project.